All right, so in this video, we're going to cover a little bit more advanced Blackboard, including changing your course entry page and building an exam. So if I again enter the generic Blackboard page from our basics video, what we'll notice is clicking into it, it brings me to an empty announcements page. But in the basics video, I showed that we could add a bunch of course content like we did earlier here. Maybe I want to now make this the page that students see when they first log in, so I have to make that adjustment. To do that, I come down here to where it says Customization, and I click on Teaching Style. When I get to the next page and I scroll down a little bit, you'll see where it says Select Course Entry Point, and it says Announcements. I just click on the drop-down menu, select Course Content, and hit Submit. What you'll now notice is that when a student then enters this Blackboard page now, instead of taking them to the announcements page, it takes them here to the course content. In addition to selecting your course entry page, another more advanced thing we can do is build an exam right here in Blackboard. What's unfortunate is that you can't just paste a Word document where you've previously written an exam into Blackboard. You instead have to build the exam in Blackboard from scratch. So to do that, you have to work in what's called the test canvas area. So in our links to the left side here, you'll see one called Course Tools, and if we scroll down, we'll see one that says Tests, Surveys, and Pools, and we'll click on that. I want to build a test, so I click on Tests. There's already one shown just for an orientation, but that's kind of pre-provided. So we want to build a new test, so I click on Build Test. I have to give it, of course, a name, so maybe I'll give it a name like Test 1 or Quiz 2, doesn't really matter, whatever it is you're building. And you, if you so choose, could give it a little description, like maybe mine is going to cover the axial skeleton. And click Submit. Okay, now that we're in our Test 1, we have to start creating questions one at a time. So to do that, we click on Create Question, and you'll see that it gives you options of what kind of question to write. So I'm going to make my first one multiple choice. So now I need to build this question. So I don't have to give my question a title, but I could. I'm going to skip on it and just write the question. For example, which of the following is part of your axial skeleton? Okay, there's our question. I now scroll down to the options area, and where I might choose that every time a student takes this quiz or test, I could make it so that Blackboard shuffles their choices by selecting Show Answers there in random order. What I now have the option to do is put in all the different choices that I want to have for this question, and I can show you can change the number of them. The default is to give you 4, but you could remove one of them, bringing it down to 3. Now our multiple choice question would just have 3 options. You can use the little drop-down menu to increase it to 5 or 6, or go with the typical default of having 4 options in your multiple choice question. What you now have to do is type in the answers or options or selections for your question. So for example, I could give the student the option of the humerus, the tibia, the femur, and finally, our correct answer we can make the sternum. Now that I've typed in my 4 options or choices of the question, I have to select which one is correct and click Submit. That brings me back to the test canvas area, where we can notice that our question has been written, and it marks off what I selected to be the right answer. What if I had accidentally, though, left it as the first box, humerus, and I now have to correct that? No problem. Next to the question, I can go into where it says Edit, and I see the question again. And this time, let's say that earlier I had accidentally left box 1 checked, which was the wrong answer. I now can come in, switch to the correct answer, click Submit, and we've now edited the question to have the correct answer. That means we're ready to move on to another question. And let's think about this time what it might look like to build a question for a practical exam. So for that, what I'm going to need to do is maybe a fill-in-the-blank kind of a question. So for a fill-in-the-blank kind of a question, I might want to bring in a picture, because if it's a practical exam, I might want to bring in a picture of a anatomy diagram or a plastic anatomy model, or maybe even a dissection specimen. So notice this little icon right here that kind of looks like a photograph, and see how when you hover over that, it says insert or edit an image. Well, that means you're going to have an image ready to go. So to do that, we're going to want to come over to, say, some Blackboard slides, or I'm sorry, some PowerPoint slides. So the first thing is, I can show you that in this image here, don't mind this, I'm just going to ungroup these. Let's say that you have built a PowerPoint slide with a picture, some arrows, and some numbers. First thing I can show you is that when you build something like this, everything is going to be at first separated. So notice how right now my picture is not like connected to these arrows or numbers, and if I'm going to move this whole thing over to a question, I kind of have to unite all of them. So here's what you do. I left click on my mouse and drag holding the click down, dragging across the whole slide, and notice how it highlights everything. I've highlighted the picture, the arrows, the text boxes, and now I'm going to right click on my mouse and it brings up this menu. By hovering over group, I select that I want to group these, and now notice that this image has united everything. The picture, the arrows, the numbers are all now one image. Now that I've grouped everything, I can save this. If I again right-click on my mouse, you'll see that the same drop-down menu comes up, and one of the options says Save as Picture. When I click that, I'm going to browse my computer for where I want to put it. So here's what I chose. I, on my desktop in advance, made a folder called Images for Practical Exam 2, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in there. I already tried it once earlier as Picture 1. Doing it again now makes it a new one, Picture 2, and I save it. If I now go back to Blackboard and I click on that little icon that says Insert Image, it's going to bring me to a new page where I can browse my computer and look for the image I just saved. If I go to that desktop, to that folder where I plan to save everything, choose one of my pictures, and click Open, it has just actually dropped the picture in there, even though we can't really see it. There we go. And I click Insert. It's asking if I want to put in a description. Don't really need a description, so I just click OK. And you can now see that the picture is inserted into my test box. We can see the black line right here is the cursor. So I'm just going to hit Enter, and now my cursor is below the picture, or maybe I now type in my fill-in-the-blank question. For example, structure number 30 is the blank. Notice that in the picture, structure 30 is pointing at the esophagus, and in my fill-in-the-blank question now, I'm going to come down here and type that in as the correct answer. Simply enough, we would now click Submit. The thing though is, what if we want to make our question, our fill-in-the-blank question here, a little less specific? Instead of an exact match, I could make it say contains. Or if one anatomical structure has two different names, I could make it so that my fill-in-the-blank question has two correct answers. So for example, I could have a second box here where again my answer would either exactly match or could contain the word that I'm looking for. Let's take an example of where having the contain in there is beneficial, or why there might be multiple answers. Let's say, for example, you're doing an A&P2 practical, and you want to have them identify a valve that has multiple names, like bicuspid valve or mitral valve. By having two different answers and typing in bicuspid in one and mitral in another, you account for the possibility of the two different names. The other thing to keep in mind is that when it says exact match, then what the student types in has to match exactly. So let's say you have a question that you're giving to your students where the exact match answer might be the right subclavian artery. But what if your students abbreviate and just put right subclavian A? If that was the case, then having exact match would mark them wrong. But if you put contains, then even though the full answer might be right subclavian artery, As long as it contains this abbreviated phrasing of it, it gives the student credit. So not that these are the correct answers exactly, obviously, for our structure 30 being the esophagus, but simply enough, once I've put in all my potential answers and have specified that it doesn't have to exactly match or that I choose to have it match exactly, it's up to you, we then click Submit. What we can now notice is that in the test canvas area, my two different questions, my multiple choice and my fill in the blank from the diagram, are ready to go. After a while, after you've built all of your questions and you feel like you've built the exam fully, you would click OK. At this point, you're now ready to deploy this test or quiz, and so the way you do that is by going back to your course's homepage. Whereas earlier in our last video we learned how to build content, we're now going to build an assessment. So for building our assessment, we're going to build a test, and we're going to go ahead and select the test we just built in our test canvas area a few minutes ago, and click Submit. Now that we're in our, deploying our test area, it's going to ask us some questions. We could give the test a description. We could choose to have an announcement or the description pop up for students. We could choose to have an announcement automatically generated to let them know the test is ready. But most important is to make the exam available to the students, otherwise they don't have access to it. If you want to make them able to practice or do multiple submissions, you can choose to do so. If you want to set a time limit, you can choose to do so by setting a timer, like maybe for a quiz, giving them only, say, 15 minutes, or for a longer exam, maybe a full hour. If you don't want students to be able to pause the exam and come back to it, you can force them to finish it in the given amount of time. You can set it so that the exam is shown to them over a course of a single day, or I might recommend multiple days, giving the students like a broad time window in which to get the exam done. And you, of course, can set a specific due date by which they have to have it completed. What's then also interesting is that what if you have students that, due to accommodations, get extended time? No problem. You just click on this box here, Add Users, and that would bring up any student that is in that Blackboard page. You then select any student that gets extended time, and once you click Submit there, it'll show every student with a little timer next to their name. That allows you to make the timer longer for individual students. And so assuming once you've set all the parameters for your exam and given any students that need it the extended time and a due date, etc., you then finally click Submit. What you'd then find is that when you come back to your course's homepage, you would see that your exam has been deployed, and then once students have taken it and the Blackboard system has graded it, it would even show up in the students' My Grades link and show up in your full grade center.